Hey, this is Seth Parnell, the minister of the Portia Church of Christ, and this is episode 182 of the Midweek Bible Study. Hope that you are doing well. Hope things are going good for you. We appreciate you being here with us tonight. It's always good in order to come together, in order to study God's Word. Oh, got it. Yeah. Might be easier for you to hear me. Let's get my mic up here. There we go. That should be much better. It's good to have you here. Like I said, hope things are going well for you, and we hope that you are doing all right. And so we'll see what we can do here tonight. As we always do, want to give you an invitation. If you're someone who is near the Portia area, come by and see us sometime. We would love to see you. We are located at 307 South Jackson Street in Portia, Arkansas, and right now we are meeting at 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, 5 o'clock on Sunday night, and 6 o'clock on Wednesday night. And so if you're in the area, come by and see us. And we would love to talk to you, love to worship with you. And as we continue to go along. Right now we are having a class on, I believe it's 1 Corinthians on Sunday morning, and then we're having a class on Acts on Wednesday night. And so we're currently in Acts chapter 10. We're finishing up the story of Cornelius in our Wednesday night class. And so if you're in the area, we'd love to have you join in on the discussion and join in on the class. We usually have a pretty good one, and so hopefully you can join us with that. Also, if you have any questions or comments, or if you have any suggestions for future episodes, then feel free to send those our way. We would love to hear from you. We'd love to see what you would have to say. And so it's always good to hear back from people who watch this. And so we are going to continue on here, and it's good to see some people here. We got the Dunlaps are here. Hope that you guys are doing good. I always appreciate you guys stopping by here with us. But we are going to be in James chapter 4 here tonight. James chapter 4. If you got outside today, it was a beautiful day weather-wise, but here we're going to get some storms probably tonight. So if you're going out tonight, please be safe and be careful out there, because sometimes during this time of year we can have some pretty strong storms, and so hopefully you can be safe out there. But we are going to focus in here tonight on James chapter 4, verses 7 down through about verse 10 here. This is going to be our focus here for tonight. As we said, this is probably not going to be too long of an episode, but I think we can always find some good things here as we take a look at what James has to say. James is someone who is he has a very kind of straightforward approach, to the gospel. He's someone who his instruction is sometimes referred to as practical, because he's a very practical person. You read throughout James chapter 1 and James chapter 2, they're tremendous. They've got a lot of great stuff, in them. In James, in James, chapter 1, he has the introduction to the book, and he talks about some of the introductory things, for there. James chapter 2 is known for mainly has two things. He discusses, partiality, in the church. Saying don't show a person, of wealth, great honor, and then, throw a poorer person, in the back. It says you treat people, equally. And he also talks about the relationship between faith and works, and how faith without works, is dead. And he spends quite a bit of time expounding on that and working on that. And which is something that's supported, by Paul and other people, even though a lot of times it's there's some people who aren't big fans of James chapter 2. I think Martin Luther was the famous one who said that James chapter 2 was one of the kind of the weakest chapters in the Bible, but it's a very strong, it's a very good one. And James chapter 3, he talks about the power of our words and how the tongue can be both a blessing and a danger, and it's almost impossible for a man to tame. And so we got to be careful with the words that we say. But in chapter 4, As the title here, it says, warning against worldliness. He's going to speak to the people here that he's writing to in very, very strong terms. If you look at verse 4 here, you can see how serious he is. And he starts out by talking about the quarrels they were having, how they were going to war with each other, and what the source of that was. He says, what causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is this not your passions that are at war within you? You desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask, but you ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly. And so in verse 4 here, he says, you adulterous people, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? That's quite a strong thing to say. You adulterous people, especially if you had in this culture that had a much higher standard of purity than what we're familiar with in our culture here in the United States. Sometimes we wish that was better, but it's not. And so a lot of times there's a lack of purity in everything that we see. But in this time, being called an adulterer or an adulteress was a very, very severe insult. It was something that was very, very strong language. But that's what he says here. He says, you adulterous people, do you not know friendship with the world is enmity with God? So James is really, he's not like berating them for, no reason, but he's speaking very strongly and very directly because this was an important thing here to say. And so he talks a little bit more about this in verses 5, and 6. And then verse 6, he says, but he gives more grace. Therefore it says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And so those who live in pride are actually living in opposition to God because they, in their mind, in their world, they put themselves above God. And so God gives grace to those who are humble, but he opposes those who are proud. So that brings us down to our section here in verse 7, where he's going to give them some instruction. That's pretty well known. You no doubt heard some sermons on this before if you've been in church for a while. But in verse 7, he says, submit yourselves therefore to God and resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Be wretched and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you. And so he says, submit yourselves therefore to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. That's how he starts out this section of scripture. And before we go any further, I want to say hi to the Malins. Hope that you guys are doing well. Hope everything is going good up your way. We got Donna here and Jim and Vonda. Hope you guys are doing good. Hope you always good to see you guys stopping by here as well. And we got Sandy's here as well. Hope that you are doing good. Appreciate you being with us here tonight. But we've got in verse 7, like I said here, he says, submit yourselves therefore to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Now, this, of course, this is one of those things you can easily read over. You can kind of scan over quickly and not really grasp the full weight of this. Because just in that first sentence, submit yourselves therefore to God, that could be a whole group of lessons that we could go over. What does it really mean to submit yourself, to God? What does that look like? What does that entail? What is going on in a person who truly and fully submits themselves, to God? That's a big, question. And this is what James is telling them. He says, do this, and in opposition to what he's, of course, in the context of what he's saying earlier, he says, don't live, in pride. Don't live for yourself. Don't be someone who lifts up, your own self for your own benefit, but rather submit yourself, to God. Be someone who highlights the word of God as something that is more important, than your own. Be someone who someone who makes it a purpose for your life in order to glorify God, in order to give Him praise. You be someone who is willing to forego your own preferences, your own conveniences, your own way of doing things, to do things the way God wants us to do. I'm sure people can there's a lot of things that we are called to do as Christians that maybe sometimes be inconvenient for us. Maybe something that's not the most popular thing to do. Maybe it's something that costs us something. It may be something though where if we didn't live the life of a Christian, we may be more profitable in something. We may find ourselves in situations like that. But if we submit ourselves to God, that means that His word takes precedence over our own. And so when He says that we are to be baptized for the remission of our sins, well, we may say, I don't like, getting wet. That's inconvenient, to find water and to put somebody under and bring them back up. Do we have to do things like that? It would be so much easier just to change that a little. But if we're going to submit ourselves to God, what does God command us to do? To be baptized for the remission of our sins, to be immersed in water. That's a small piece of what it means to submit ourselves, to God, to put His word, above our own and our own wants and our own way of doing things, and do things, His way. To not live in pride, as the previous verse says, but to live for Him. And so He says, submit to God and then resist the devil, and he will flee from you. So the first part of this equation is to submit to God. That has to be something that's included. Without that, we're going to be lost anyway. And so we have to submit ourselves to God. The second part is to resist the devil. Now, it might be a whole lot easier if we could to submit ourselves to God if there was, a free, if we had a free path, if we had someone that could live throughout this life with no resistance, no obstacles, nothing to stand in our way, it might be easier in order to submit ourselves to God. But we know that that's not the case, because we have an adversary. We have someone who resists, who stands in opposition to God and will do whatever it takes in order to pull us away from Him as well. That, of course, is Satan, is the devil. And he's going to do whatever he can in order to pull us away, to distract us, to throw obstacles in our path, or to boast us up to where we start living in pride instead of submitting ourselves to God. There's several tricks of the trade that Satan can use in order to put us where we do not need to be, but rather he says to resist, the devil. Resist, those schemes. Resist those things that he uses in order to draw us away. And if we do, it says that he will flee, from us. You think back to the time of the temptation in Matthew chapter 4, when Jesus was out there in the wilderness. He had not eaten for a very, very long time. And he's out there in the wilderness, and he is, he is in dire need of some food in order to continue to sustain himself. I mean, he's gone a long time without eating. And in this weakened state, Satan comes to him and he tempts him, 3 times. He says, if you are the Son of God, turn these stones into bread. If you are the Son of God, jump down you from this height and let the angels save you. If you bow down to me, I will give you all the kingdoms of, the earth. That's what Satan, told him. That's what he put in his, that's what he offered him. But every single time, Jesus said, it is written, and gave his response to that. He resisted, the devil. And what happened that third time after, Jesus, kind of defended against him after he rejected him the third time? It says that he left. He fled, from him. Jesus resisted him and he fled, from him. And so if we're someone who makes it a point to resist, to be someone who resists, those things that that will draw us away from God. We can be someone that can make a lot of progress, but Satan usually makes a lot of those things very attractive. Very something that draws us, that's designed to draw us in, to draw us away. And every person's different. You may have something that doesn't affect another person at all, but maybe that harms you in a way that it pulls you away from God. We deal with different situations, but we know that if we're someone who doesn't just is not ignorant of what Satan is trying to do, for someone who knows that there is an adversary out there, as he's described in other places as a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour, we can be better equipped. We can be better suited in order to fight that spiritual war that we're called to fight. As the old saying goes, knowing is half the battle. If we are knowledgeable of this, then we can be someone that can better fight against it. And so resist those temptations of pride, resist those temptations of greed, resist those temptations of wanting to change to not elevate yourself and to not submit to God, and he will flee from you. Doesn't mean we're never going to face another obstacle or another thing in our path, but we can have that temporary respite. But in verse 8, he says, "You draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded." He says, draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. You cleanse your hands, you purify your hearts, and do not be double-minded. He says to draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Now that is if there's ever a comforting verse in the Bible, this is one of the best. If you're looking for comfort, this is one of the best verses to take a look at in the Bible. James chapter 4 and verse 8. If we are someone who draws near to God, he will draw near to us. Think about that. Think about what that means. God is not some distant entity that does not give a care for us, that not even knows of our existence, but someone who just is up there and is just doing his thing and doesn't care for us. But he's someone that if we obey, if we're obedient to him, and we draw near to him, he's going to come to us as well. And the creator of the universe, the creator of this world, can be someone that will come to us, and we can have that relationship with him. So even the average person, even the most unimportant person, can be someone that can pray to the God of the one true God, the creator of this world, and can draw near to him. And that's a very, very comforting thing. But we know that there can be obstacles to drawing near to God. As James says here, he says, cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, and you double-minded. To cleanse your hands, be someone who cleanses themselves from unrighteousness, to change what they're doing, so they're living according to a standard of righteousness and not according to the standard of their own thinking, and to purify their hearts and not be double-minded. What does it mean to be double-minded? Trying to serve two things at once, trying to serve yourself, trying to serve God, something that you cannot do. Because as God says, you can serve me or you can reject me, but I'm not going to be shared among these different things. And so do not be double-minded, because if you're divided, that you're certainly going to fall in that sense. And so there's a responsibility on our part. If we're going to draw near to God, God's given us promise. He will draw near to us if we do our part. But there's a responsibility. There's something we have to do in order to make that happen. We need to be someone who cleanses ourselves of unrighteousness. And that doesn't mean we're going to be perfect, but it does mean we're going to be headed in that right direction. We're not going to be double-minded. We're not going to be serving more things than what God is. But We're going to be focused on what is truly important. Because he says here, and if you remember in the context of this chapter, he says, "You're being wretched and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you." What does he mean by saying, "Be wretched and mourn and weep, and let your laughter be turned to mourning, and your joy to gloom"? Does that mean in order to be, spiritual, in order to draw near to God, we have to weep and mourn, and we cannot laugh, and we have to let our joy be turned to gloom and be someone who is, in anguish and sad all the time? Well, no, that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about an expression of humility. If you think about the way that, especially in the Jewish culture, the way that they express their mourning, oftentimes they would, put on sackcloth and ashes. They would, kind of sit in a public place, and they would mourn, and they would cry out aloud. They would willingly put themselves in a pitiful state in order to communicate the anguish that they were going through. And so he says, to mourn and weep, and let your laughter be turned to mourning, your joy to gloom. Basically saying, be someone who doesn't live with that sense of self-exaltation, but be someone who humbles yourself before the Lord, and he will exalt you. And so if you want to have true success, if you want to be where we need to be, it's not about pumping yourself up to where you are above everything, but true spiritual success is found in the Lord exalting you, and not you lifting yourself up. But God's going to do the hard part. He's going to do the heavy lifting if we're someone who humbles ourselves before the Lord. And that's opposite thinking, as we know, as what the world teaches us many times. That's very different from what is thrown at us a lot. We're told you gotta get all that is yours. You gotta climb that ladder. You gotta be someone who hustles, and someone who does everything that you can in order to build yourself up. But James says we need to live a humble life. We need to humble ourselves before God and let God do that heavy lifting. Let God exalt us, and we know that we will be. That is true exaltation. That's something that is much greater, much more, or much longer lasting than anything that this world could do. Is that exaltation that God has given us. Because you read in the major prophets, and you read Revelation, you read some of those scenes in the throne room where they're praising God, and he's sitting on the throne. Imagine what that is like. Imagine what that type of exaltation is like. It's pretty strong. We can't comprehend what it's truly like. It's like, if you have a piece of music, that is very, like a powerful piece of music. It's very stirring. It's very emotional, and maybe, very, very well done. But if you never hear that music, but you read an article of somebody talking about, that music, it's not the same thing. If you hear that music, you can, experience that for yourself. But if you're just, reading a description of it, then you understand it, but you don't really understand it in that sense. Like, we read those descriptions of the throne room and of the presence of God, but we don't truly understand it because we're not experiencing it. But when we do get to experience it, that's going to be true exaltation. That's going to be something that's far greater than this world could ever dream of. And that's something that we can truly look forward to. But how do we get there? How do we, arrive at something that's much greater? We got to humble ourselves before the Lord, and he will lift us up. And so we can see what James says here in James chapter 4, verses 7 through 10. He says, the first step is we have to submit ourselves, to God. We have to be someone who puts the commands of God above our own words, our own thinking, our own way of life. And so that we know that his words are for our best, that his word is for our own benefit, the best version of ourselves can be found in submitting to God. And he says, to cleanse our hands, to cleanse ourselves of unrighteousness, live according to that standard that God has given us. And we have a responsibility if we're going to draw near to God, as He will draw near to us. We have to do our part. We have to be someone who makes an effort to live that righteous life and not be double-minded, not serving more than one thing, but serving the one true God. We need to be someone who humbles ourselves with more than just an empty gesture, but with our life. We need to humble ourselves with our life, because if we do, as he says there in verse 10, he will exalt us, and that will be true exaltation. And so there's more that we could say about this section of verses, but I think we will stop there and we will call it for the night. But I really like the book of James. I hope you do too. And we may look in the future about doing some more guided series. And right now we're just kind of jumping from place to place. We're taking a verse here and a section there, and just kind of making some observations about it, making some study about it. But if it's something that you could follow along with better, we may look at doing like a series of lessons where we go over several things. It's a little bit more structured, a little bit more guided. We may do that in the future, so that it might be a little bit easier to follow. But I know the first gospel meeting I ever did was on the book of James. I did a sermon for each chapter in the book. And so it's a great book to study. If you ever get a chance, I encourage you to read the book of James, because it has a lot of good stuff for us. It's good to see Cheryl here. Hope that you are doing well. Glad you were able to stop by with us here tonight. But I think that we will see you back here next Thursday night, 7:00 Central Standard Time. We will be here for another lesson. I hope this is something that has benefited you. I hope it's something that has encouraged you and kind of brightened your walking with God. It's always good for me to be able to join you in this virtual environment in order to do this study. But until next time, I hope you can go out and be the light of the world and glorify God in everything that you do. Catch you next time.